The small town was quiet, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, and stories traveled faster than the wind. On a narrow street lined with old brick buildings and small cafes, there lived a woman who seemed completely ordinary. She moved through her life like a shadow, barely noticed by those around her. She worked at the local library, shelving books, assisting visitors, and answering questions. Always polite, but never drawing attention to herself. People would nod politely when they saw her, sometimes exchange a few words, but no one really knew her. No one imagined the secret she carried within. Every morning, she walked to work with her backpack slung over one shoulder, and her hair tied back in a simple ponytail. She always wore practical clothes, often gray or brown, blending into the crowd. She didn't have the loud laugh of someone who demanded attention, nor did she tell stories that captured a room. She was quiet, even a little shy, but there was something about her calm presence that made people feel at ease. Still, in a town where everyone liked to know each other, she remained a mystery. Even those who passed her daily on the street never suspected what lay beneath her ordinary exterior. Her apartment was small and neat, decorated modestly with a few plants and some framed photographs of landscapes she had never visited, but admired in books. There was no hint of luxury, no sign that she had ever lived in grand places. But the moment someone stepped into her living room, they would notice the piano in the corner. It was an old upright, polished and cared for, with keys that gleamed despite years of use. It was the one thing in her life that seemed to hold a special kind of energy, a part of her that was alive and vibrant in a way that contrasted sharply with the quiet of her everyday existence. She would sit at the piano often, late at night when the city outside had gone to sleep. The library was closed, the streetlights casting soft shadows on her walls, and she would play, not simple songs, but pieces that were difficult, intricate, and demanding. She moved her fingers over the keys with a grace and precision that seemed impossible for someone who spent her days quietly shelving books. The music that flowed from her was alive, full of emotion, technically perfect, yet deeply human. She didn't play for anyone else. She played for herself, for the joy it brought, for the way it made her feel free. Her life was a careful balance. By day, she was the quiet library assistant, unnoticed and unremarkable. By night, she became something entirely different, a master of her craft, a hidden artist living in a world where only she could witness her own brilliance. She had learned to keep this side of herself hidden, understanding that people in her town would not be able to see past her unassuming exterior. Her talent was hers alone, a secret she protected fiercely. It was during one of these quiet evenings at the library that the first hint of change came into her life. The local music school was holding a recital, and teachers were busy preparing students for their performances. There was excitement in the air, a kind of nervous energy that filled the hallways. The recital featured students of all ages, some who had been practicing for years, and some who were new to the piano. Among the pieces chosen, there was one that was particularly difficult. Known for its complexity and technical demands, the teacher in charge of the recital had been struggling to find a student capable of performing it successfully. The woman had gone to the music school once to drop off a book donation from the library. She had not intended to be noticed, simply walking through the hallways as quietly as she could. But the teachers could see her sitting at the practice pianos, her fingers gliding over the keys even in that brief moment. It was enough for them to pause and watch, a little confused by the confidence in her movements. They whispered among themselves, curious but dismissive, thinking perhaps she was just experimenting or had some basic training. They had no idea what she could truly do. Days passed, and the teachers grew more frustrated with the student, who was supposed to perform the difficult piece. She kept making mistakes, unable to master the complex rhythms and fast-paced passages. The recital was approaching, and panic began to set in. They needed someone capable, someone who could make the audience sit in awe. In a moment of desperation, someone mentioned the quiet woman who had been practicing in the school. She was unassuming, almost invisible in the eyes of the staff, but perhaps she could help. It started with a polite request. One of the teachers approached her after her shift at the library, explaining the situation. They asked if she would consider performing the piece at the recital, emphasizing the importance of the event. She was startled, unsure if she had been heard correctly. She shook her head, insisting that she was not a professional and that she could not perform such a demanding piece in front of an audience. The teacher smiled awkwardly, trying to reassure her, thinking she was modest or inexperienced. They did not believe she could refuse outright. and their persistence began to feel slightly uncomfortable. She listened carefully, nodding politely, explaining her position. She told them she played the piano, yes, but only for herself. She had never performed in front of an audience, and the idea terrified her. The teachers, however, were too focused on the recital to notice her discomfort. They thought they could coax her into agreeing, believing that she might surprise them, but still within their control. They spoke of the prestige, the opportunity, the way the audience would admire her. They didn't realize that she had never sought admiration or attention, that she had long learned to hide from the world. Over the next few days, they continued to approach her. Each time she politely refused. Each time they tried a new tactic to convince her. Some offered praise, some offered encouragement, others attempted to guilt her subtly. The pressure grew, not aggressive but persistent, the kind that slowly wears at someone's resolve. She began to feel uneasy, a tightness in her chest that she hadn't experienced in years. The piano, her refuge, suddenly became a place of uncertainty. At home, she sat at her piano and pondered the request. She knew she could play the piece flawlessly. Her skills were far beyond anything the teachers could imagine. Yet, the thought of performing in front of people, of having every note scrutinized, filled her with apprehension. She played the piece quietly, allowing the music to flow as it always had, feeling the familiar joy and freedom that came with it. But this time, the music carried a different weight, a reminder that her secret life could no longer remain entirely private. The community, meanwhile, buzzed with anticipation for the recital. Posters were hung in shops and cafes, announcements were made in the local paper, and families marked their calendars. The teachers were increasingly anxious, knowing that the difficult piece was the highlight of the program, and that failure would cast a shadow over the entire event. They spoke often of the quiet woman who might take the stage, unsure if it was wise to rely on someone they barely knew. Their curiosity mixed with skepticism. They couldn't predict what she might do. Despite her hesitation, the woman began to practice the piece more seriously. Each night, she devoted herself to the music, perfecting each section, feeling her fingers move with the memory of countless hours of secret practice over the years. The piece demanded precision, strength, and emotional depth, all of which she could provide effortlessly. Yet, the fear of being seen, of being exposed, gnawed at her. She was stepping into a world she had avoided, a world where people would finally see her abilities. Her apartment, once a sanctuary, became a place of preparation. She would play for hours, pausing only to rest her hands or reflect on the music. Each note, each phrase, reminded her of the duality of her life, the quiet, ordinary woman in the daytime and the masterful pianist in the night. She realized that this was a turning point, a moment that could change her life forever, even if she wished it were otherwise. She felt both excitement and dread, a combination that made her music more alive than ever. Neighbors and friends began to notice subtle changes in her routine. She seemed more focused, sometimes distant, as if her mind was elsewhere. A few people mentioned seeing her leave for the music school late in the evening, carrying her small bag with purpose, but none understood why. To them, she was still the same quiet, unremarkable woman they had always known. Only she knew the truth, and it was a truth that would soon reveal itself to everyone else, in a way she could not yet predict. The story of the quiet woman and the difficult piano piece was beginning, and though the town was unaware, a transformation was about to unfold. The woman who had lived in the shadows was preparing to step into the light, though she did not yet know if she would embrace it, or retreat back into the safety of her anonymity. For now, she practiced, she pondered, and she waited, letting the music guide her through the tension and uncertainty that filled her days and nights. The quiet woman could feel the weight of the music school's request pressing on her mind. It was not just a simple favor they were asking, it was a challenge, a demand that she step into the spotlight and perform a piece that was notorious for its difficulty. She had avoided attention all her life, and the thought of sitting in front of a crowded auditorium filled her with unease. She spent her evenings pacing her small apartment, her mind racing with possibilities and fears. Every time she imagined herself performing, her stomach tightened. Yet a small spark of curiosity and excitement flickered within her. Despite her reservations, the teachers did not give up. They visited the library one afternoon, their steps cautious but determined. They approached her quietly, careful not to draw too much attention from the visitors around them. One of the teachers, the head of the recital committee, spoke first. He tried to use gentle encouragement, mentioning the importance of the piece, the way it would impress the audience, and how it could be a memorable moment for the school. The woman listened politely, nodding, careful not to reveal the turmoil she felt inside. She smiled and shook her head, repeating that she was not a professional and that performing in front of an audience was far beyond her comfort zone. The teachers were persistent but polite. They brought up other students who might have performed the piece, but had given up after repeated failures. They described the piece in detail, highlighting the speed, the complexity, and the emotional depth it demanded. They spoke of the audience, families, and local musicians who would be watching. They spoke as if she were a solution to a problem, not realizing that she was much more than they could imagine. She listened to their words, feeling the familiar tension in her chest, but also recognizing the opportunity to connect with the music in a new way. For a brief moment, she considered refusing again, but then she thought about the music itself, the way it had always been her refuge, her voice, her secret. That evening, she sat at her piano, hands hovering over the keys. The apartment was silent except for the soft ticking of a clock on the wall. She played the first few notes of the difficult piece, feeling each key under her fingers as if reconnecting with an old friend. She played slowly at first, deliberately, testing her memory and muscle control. Her eyes were closed, her body relaxed, yet her mind was sharp and focused. Every note, every chord, felt natural, as though the piano itself guided her through the piece. By the time she reached the middle section, her fingers were moving faster, confident, precise. The music filled the room, echoing softly against the walls, a sound that seemed to vibrate with her hidden strength. Her practice continued late into the night. She took small breaks, sipping tea, breathing deeply, and reflecting on her life. She thought about the years she had spent learning music, the lessons with her first teacher who had recognized her potential long ago, and the sacrifices she had made to keep her talent hidden. Her memories were bittersweet, filled with both joy and regret. She had wanted to live quietly, but the music always called to her, demanding expression, demanding recognition, even if she had resisted it for years. Now, with the recital approaching, she realized that perhaps it was time to answer that call. The following days were filled with quiet preparation. She visited the music school under the guise of casual practice sessions, carefully avoiding drawing attention from students and teachers. She wanted to practice in a space where she could feel the resonance of the piano, without being pressured by an audience. She worked tirelessly, perfecting the intricate passages that required fast fingerwork, adjusting the dynamics of each section, and experimenting with emotional expression to bring the piece to life. Her talent revealed itself fully in these private sessions, and she felt a growing confidence in her ability to perform the piece flawlessly. At the same time, the teachers continued to encourage her, unaware of the true depth of her skill. They offered guidance, tips, and suggestions, assuming she was a capable but nervous amateur. They were impressed by her dedication, but had no idea how extraordinary her abilities were. They continued to speak of the recital as if it were a trial for her, expecting mistakes, hoping for at least a respectable performance. Their underestimation fueled a quiet determination in her. She would not disappoint them, but not for their sake, for her own love of the music. One evening, a small storm swept through the town. Rain tapped gently against the windows, and the wind rustled the leaves outside. The woman sat at her piano, the room dimly lit by a single lamp. She played through the entire piece, her fingers moving with confidence and grace. The storm outside seemed to echo the intensity of the music, the tempo rising and falling, matching the emotional currents of her performance. She felt the piece in every fiber of her being, a living expression of her thoughts and feelings. For the first time, she allowed herself to imagine performing it in front of an audience, picturing the room, the people, the reactions, and it did not feel frightening, it felt exhilarating. Her thoughts drifted to the audience, imagining their surprise when an ordinary-looking woman would sit down at the piano and fill the room with a sound they had never expected. She thought about the teachers, expecting failure but witnessing something they could not have imagined. She realized that her life, so carefully balanced between the ordinary and the extraordinary, was about to change. She could continue to hide, to retreat into the shadows, or she could embrace this moment and let the music speak for her. The decision weighed heavily, but the music itself seemed to make the choice for her. The night before the recital, she could not sleep. She lay in her small bed, listening to the distant hum of the town and the soft patter of rain against the window. Her mind replayed the difficult sections of the piece, the fast runs, the leaps across the keys, the delicate phrasing that demanded both precision and feeling. She visualized every movement, every note, and for the first time, she did not feel fear. She felt anticipation, a quiet thrill that coursed through her like electricity. She realized that the music had always been a part of her identity, whether she acknowledged it or not. And now, the world would finally witness what she had kept hidden. The morning of the recital arrived, bright and crisp. The town was buzzing with energy as families, friends, and music enthusiasts gathered in the small auditorium. Posters advertised the performances, and the teachers moved nervously among the audience, making last-minute preparations and adjusting seating. The piece she was to perform was the highlight, a challenge that had caused stress and anxiety for weeks. Everyone was eager to see who would rise to the occasion. She arrived quietly, carrying only a small bag with sheet music she had prepared for reference. She walked through the backstage area, unnoticed by most of the students and audience members. No one guessed who she really was. No one could imagine the skill that she carried in her hands. The teachers were slightly relieved to see her, thinking she might provide a decent performance. But they did not expect brilliance. They spoke in hushed tones, commenting on her quiet demeanor, underestimating her completely. As the recital began, she watched from the wings, listening to the other performers. Some were nervous, some confident, but all were met with polite applause. The audience was engaged, waiting for the moment they would witness the difficult piece. Unaware that the real surprise was yet to come, she could hear the teachers whispering, discussing who might be ready to perform, still not realizing that the answer was already among them. The air was thick with anticipation, and she felt her heart beat steadily, ready to meet the challenge that awaited her. When her turn came, she walked to the piano with quiet confidence. She took a deep breath, feeling the familiar keys under her fingers. The room was silent, the audience unaware of the transformation that was about to unfold. She sat down, adjusted her posture, and placed her hands on the keys. The first note sounded, delicate and precise, and immediately, the room seemed to shift. The ordinary woman had become a vessel for music, her fingers dancing over the keys with skill and emotion that captivated every listener. The teachers exchanged astonished glances, realizing too late that they had underestimated her. The recital had begun, and the quiet woman who had seemed unremarkable was about to reveal her true genius. The woman sat quietly in the dim backstage area, her hands folded over her knees, her mind alive with anticipation. The murmur of the audience beyond the curtain seemed distant, as if she were in a separate world where only she and the piano existed. Her heart beat steadily, not with fear, but with focus. She had prepared for this moment in secret, practicing every day, mastering every note, every subtle inflection of the difficult piece she was about to perform. Yet, even with all her preparation, she felt a quiet tremor of nervousness. Performing in front of an audience was an entirely different experience from playing alone in her apartment. She thought back to her childhood, remembering long hours spent at a piano under the guidance of a patient and demanding mentor. Those lessons had shaped her, honing her talent, teaching her discipline and precision. She had been good then, perhaps even exceptional, but life had pulled her away from the path of a professional musician. Family obligations, personal choices, and a desire to remain unnoticed had all led her to the quiet life she now lived. The piano had become her refuge, a place where she could express herself without the scrutiny of others. But tonight, that sanctuary would become a stage, and she could not hide. The noise of the audience faded further as she focused on the music in her mind. She imagined each measure, the flow of notes, the rhythm, the dynamics, the emotional depth she wanted to convey. She had spent weeks internalizing the piece, memorizing it not just with her fingers but with her heart. She understood every pause, every accent, every subtle shift in tone. This was not a simple recital piece. It was a challenge that demanded technical mastery and emotional expression simultaneously. She felt the weight of that responsibility, but it did not deter her. In fact, it strengthened her resolve. The stage manager appeared, motioning for her to get ready. She stood slowly, taking deep breaths, feeling the smooth fabric of her dress beneath her fingers. She walked toward the piano with measured steps, her posture calm, her movements deliberate. The audience could see her now, a woman of ordinary appearance, seemingly quiet and unremarkable. No one could have guessed the depth of skill she carried in her hands. The teachers in the wings exchanged uncertain glances, expecting a cautious performance. Perhaps some errors, maybe even embarrassment. They had no idea that they were about to witness something extraordinary. She sat down at the piano, her fingers hovering over the keys. The room fell silent, the air charged with anticipation. She closed her eyes briefly, centering herself, letting the music flow through her mind before it flowed through her fingers. The first note sounded delicate and precise, filling the auditorium with clarity. She felt the resonance beneath her fingertips, the vibrations carrying the emotion she intended. The piece unfolded as she had envisioned, each passage executed with a balance of technical precision and expressive power. The audience leaned in instinctively, drawn into the sound. As she played, memories surfaced of moments long past. The early mornings of practice, the challenges of learning complex passages, the exhilaration of mastering a difficult section. She remembered the joy of discovery, the satisfaction of making the music come alive under her touch. These memories fueled her performance, adding depth and emotion that could not be taught. She was not performing for recognition or praise. She was performing because the music demanded it, because it was an extension of herself. The teachers in the wings were stunned. They had expected a competent amateur at best, someone who might stumble through the difficult passages. Instead, they saw a performer who was completely in control, confident, expressive. Her fingers moved with effortless precision, the notes flowing seamlessly. Yet the performance was not mechanical. It was alive, full of emotion and nuance, conveying a story that captivated everyone listening. Some of the teachers exchanged whispered words of disbelief, realizing that they had underestimated her completely. The audience, too, was spellbound. They had come expecting a recital, perhaps some enjoyable music, but nothing prepared them for the level of skill and artistry they were witnessing. The ordinary-looking woman at the piano was transforming the room with her performance, filling it with a sound that was both powerful and delicate, complex and understandable, technical and deeply human. Some listeners leaned forward, their eyes widening in surprise. Others closed their eyes, letting the music wash over them, feeling the emotion in every note. Halfway through the piece, she reached the most demanding section, a series of rapid runs and intricate rhythms that required absolute control and precision. She felt the familiar thrill of challenge, the excitement of pushing her abilities to the limit. Her fingers flew over the keys, her hands moving with a fluidity that seemed effortless. Yet every motion was deliberate, every note carefully articulated. The audience could sense the tension and release, the ebb and flow of the music, and they responded with silent admiration, captivated by the mastery before them. In the wings, the teachers watched in awe. They whispered to each other, barely believing what they were seeing. They had thought she would be nervous, hesitant, possibly faltering under the pressure. Instead, she was commanding the music, controlling every phrase with confidence and artistry. Their assumptions about her ordinary appearance and quiet demeanor were shattered. They realized that talent and skill could hide behind the most unassuming faces, and that they had been completely wrong in underestimating her. As the piece continued, she allowed herself to become fully immersed in the music. She felt a connection with every note, every chord, as if the piano and she were one. The audience could feel it too, the emotional depth, the subtle shifts in dynamics, the interplay between power and delicacy. It was not just a display of technical skill, it was storytelling through sound. Every person listening was drawn into the narrative she was creating, transported by the beauty and intensity of her performance. For a moment, she thought about her life, the quiet years she had spent away from the spotlight, the decisions that had led her here. She realized that all those years of practice, discipline, and self-restraint had prepared her for this moment. The music she had played alone, in the safety of her apartment, now spoke to a world that had never known her true abilities. She felt a sense of liberation, a quiet joy that she had not expected. Performing in front of an audience, she discovered, was not about fear or approval. It was about sharing a part of herself that had always existed, waiting for the right moment to emerge. The final section of the piece approached, a series of chords and phrases that demanded both technical mastery and emotional intensity. She played with a sense of inevitability, as if the music had always been destined to reach this moment. Each note resonated, carrying the weight and emotion she intended. The audience was silent, rapt, completely absorbed in the sound. Even the teachers, who had known her only as a quiet, unremarkable woman, could not take their eyes off her. They were witnessing the transformation of ordinary into extraordinary, the revelation of a hidden genius. When the final note rang out, the room was still for a heartbeat, the resonance lingering in the air. Then, as if on cue, the audience erupted into applause. Some stood, some clapped vigorously, others whispered in awe. The woman sat at the piano, her hands resting gently on the keys, her chest rising and falling as she absorbed the reaction. She allowed herself a small, humble smile, feeling a sense of accomplishment and fulfillment. She had faced her fear, embraced her talent, and shared it with the world. The music had done what words could not. It had revealed her true self. The teachers approached her cautiously, still stunned by what they had witnessed. They offered congratulations, their voices filled with genuine admiration and surprise. They asked how she had developed such skill, how she had managed to perform with such mastery and emotion. She simply smiled and nodded, saying that she had always loved music and practiced diligently. Careful not to reveal too much of her personal history, they realized that they had underestimated her, and they felt a mix of humility and awe at the talent that had been hidden in plain sight. Backstage, she packed her belongings slowly, savoring the moment. The audience continued to applaud, and she could hear the teachers discussing the performance in hushed, excited tones. For the first time in a long time, she felt seen not just for her ordinary appearance, but for the extraordinary skill and passion that she had carried all her life. She realized that the music had always been a part of her identity, a truth that could not be denied, no matter how quietly she had lived. And now, for the first time, the world had glimpsed the depth of her talent. The moment the final applause subsided, a quiet energy filled the auditorium. The woman sat at the piano, her hands resting gently on the keys, feeling the lingering vibrations of the music. Her chest rose and fell, steadying from the rush of adrenaline and emotion. She had played the piece flawlessly, each note executed with precision, each phrase infused with depth and feeling. Yet, even as the audience continued to murmur in admiration, she felt a calm satisfaction rather than triumph. This was what she had always loved about music: the ability to communicate, something words could never express. The teachers approached her cautiously, their faces a mixture of awe and disbelief. They had expected hesitation, nervous mistakes, or at least a tentative performance. Instead, they had witnessed mastery. One of them finally spoke, their voice shaking slightly. They asked her how she had acquired such skill, how she had managed to play with such confidence and expression. She smiled softly, humbly explaining that she had always loved the piano, that she had practiced diligently for years, and that music was a part of her life. She offered no dramatic story, no boastful claims, only a quiet acknowledgement of the effort and passion she had put into her art. The audience, meanwhile, remained captivated. Some were still seated, unable to move, as if the spell of the music lingered in the room. Parents whispered to each other, friends exchanged surprised glances, and even the youngest students seemed awestruck by the performance. They had come expecting an ordinary recital, perhaps some pleasant music, but what they had witnessed was extraordinary. The ordinary-looking woman who had seemed shy and unremarkable had delivered a performance that no one could forget. The room buzzed with excitement, the kind of excitement that made people speak in whispers to preserve the lingering magic. Backstage, the teachers could not stop talking about what they had just seen. They replayed the performance in their minds, astonished by the skill, the emotion, and the control. They realized that their assumptions about her ordinary appearance and quiet demeanor had been completely wrong. Talent, they understood now, could hide in the most unlikely people. They exchanged looks of humility and admiration, silently acknowledging that they had underestimated her. For them, the recital had become a lesson, a reminder that brilliance can be hidden in plain sight and that true skill is often invisible until it is revealed. The woman packed her belongings slowly, savoring the quiet after the storm of sound. She felt a sense of release, a gentle peace that came from knowing she had shared a part of herself without compromise. She had performed not for recognition, not for applause, but for the music itself, and the audience had been fortunate enough to witness it. She reflected on the years she had spent in quiet practice, the secret hours in her apartment, and the careful balance she had maintained between ordinary life and extraordinary talent. Now, for the first time, the world had glimpsed the depth of her ability, and it felt both liberating and grounding. After the recital, people approached her with admiration and curiosity. They asked for her name, her story, and her background. She answered politely but briefly, careful not to reveal too much of her personal life. She did not seek fame or attention. She only wanted to share her music. Yet, she could see the surprise and respect in their eyes, the recognition that her talent was rare and remarkable. Some asked if she would consider teaching or performing more publicly, and she smiled, acknowledging the questions without committing to any decisions. She needed time to process, to understand what this exposure meant for her carefully constructed life. The teachers lingered nearby, continuing to marvel at her performance. They discussed the technical mastery she had displayed, the emotional depth, and the confidence that had radiated from her throughout the piece. They realized that she had not only mastered the music, but had also communicated its essence, bringing life to notes that many performers could play mechanically, but never fully express. They were humbled, recognizing that their assumptions about her capabilities had been completely wrong. The quiet woman they had overlooked was, in truth, a masterful musician who could rival the best performers they had ever encountered. As the evening wound down, the auditorium gradually emptied. The hum of conversations, footsteps, and chairs being moved filled the air as the audience slowly departed. The woman remained at the piano for a few quiet moments, letting the stillness and echoes of her performance settle around her. She closed her eyes and allowed herself to feel the full weight of the experience, the mixture of exhilaration and relief that came from performing a piece she had poured her soul into. The music had become a bridge between her private world and the outside world, a moment where her talent could speak without words. She left the stage slowly, feeling the eyes of the audience and teachers on her, though they did not follow her. The hallways were quiet, the remnants of the recital lingering in the air. She walked with a calm confidence, her steps deliberate, as if she were reclaiming the space she had temporarily occupied as a performer. Her thoughts wandered to the future, to the possibilities that might open for her, and to the realization that her life could no longer remain entirely private. Yet, she did not feel fear. She felt curiosity, a quiet readiness to explore what might come next. Returning to her apartment, she unpacked her bag and sat at her piano once more. The room was silent, her refuge and sanctuary waiting for her. She played a few gentle notes, letting the music flow naturally, without the pressure of an audience or expectation. It was a private moment, a return to the simplicity and intimacy of her earlier practice sessions. She reflected on the performance, on the reaction of the teachers and audience, and on the realization that her life had shifted in subtle but significant ways. The music had revealed her, and she had been brave enough to let it do so. The days that followed were filled with a mixture of curiosity, surprise, and quiet change. Friends, neighbors, and even casual acquaintances spoke of the recital, of the ordinary-looking woman who had played with extraordinary skill. Word traveled through the town, stories and whispers spreading quickly. People who had previously overlooked her now saw her in a new light, a recognition that was both flattering and disorienting. She navigated these changes with her usual quiet grace, acknowledging the attention politely, but maintaining the humility that had always defined her. The teachers continued to speak with her, now with genuine admiration and a desire to learn more about her experience and skills. They asked if she would consider teaching masterclasses, performing at other events, or mentoring students. She listened thoughtfully, appreciating their respect and interest, but she did not rush to make decisions. She had always valued the intimacy of her music, the personal connection she had with the piano, and she wanted to preserve that as she considered the possibilities. In private moments, she reflected on how the performance had changed her perspective. She had faced a challenge she had long avoided, shared her talent with others, and received recognition without compromising her values. She realized that her love of music had always been central to her identity, and that performing could be both a personal and public expression of that passion. She felt a renewed sense of purpose, a quiet excitement for what lay ahead, tempered by the understanding that she would continue to move carefully, balancing her private life with the emerging public recognition. Her relationship with music deepened further. She began exploring new pieces, not for performance, but for personal growth and enjoyment. Each composition she studied became an exploration of skill, emotion, and self-expression. She practiced with dedication and patience, savoring the details and nuances of the music. The recital had opened a door, but she did not feel the need to rush through it. She understood that mastery was not only about public acclaim, but about a deep, ongoing connection with the art itself. The town, meanwhile, continued to buzz with stories of the recital. People spoke of the surprise and beauty of the performance, of the hidden talent in someone they had never noticed before. The teachers, students, and audience members carried the memory of the music with them, sharing it in conversations and reflections. The woman's name began to circulate quietly, a symbol of hidden brilliance and unexpected mastery. Yet, she remained humble, grounded in her own understanding of her talent and the private joy it brought her. Through it all, she maintained her ordinary routines, continuing to work at the library, move quietly through the streets, and interact politely with the people around her. Her life had changed in subtle ways, yet she held on to the simplicity and quietude that had always defined her. She understood that her talent was a part of her, but it did not need to dominate her life. She could embrace recognition while remaining true to herself, finding a balance that allowed her to grow as both a musician and a person. As the days turned into weeks, she reflected often on the performance, the reactions of the audience and teachers, and the sense of fulfillment it had brought. She understood that her journey was only beginning, that there were more challenges, more pieces, and more opportunities to express herself through music. She felt ready, not for fame or attention, but for the possibility of sharing her passion while remaining connected to the quiet, grounded life she cherished. The recital had revealed her, but it had also strengthened her, showing her that talent and humility could coexist, and that the music she loved could guide her toward new, unexpected experiences. The days following the recital brought a quiet transformation to the woman's life. The town buzzed with stories of her performance, and people who had never noticed her before now looked at her with curiosity and admiration. She walked through the streets with her usual calm demeanor, smiling politely at neighbors and friends who had begun to recognize her extraordinary talent. Yet she remained humble, careful not to let the sudden attention change the person she had always been. To her, the music itself was more important than recognition, and the respect she received was a welcome, but secondary. Consequence invitations began to arrive, requests to perform at local events, offers to teach piano lessons, and suggestions to participate in larger concerts outside the town. She considered each request carefully. For years, she had avoided attention, hiding her abilities from the world. Now, the world was reaching out to her, and she realized that this was a choice she could no longer ignore. She could continue to live quietly, or she could step forward and share her talent with a wider audience. She chose a measured approach, agreeing to perform at a few small events and accepting a few students for private lessons, always ensuring that the intimacy and joy of her music remained central. Her first public appearance after the recital was at a small community event. The hall was modest, filled with familiar faces, friends, neighbors, and teachers from the music school. She approached the piano with the same calm confidence that had carried her through the recital. Her fingers touched the keys lightly at first, as if testing the waters, but soon, the music poured out with effortless grace. The audience was captivated, their applause sincere and heartfelt. She felt a sense of connection, a quiet joy in sharing her gift, realizing that her music could touch others in ways that words could never achieve. As she began teaching, she discovered a new form of fulfillment. Guiding students through their own musical journeys reminded her of her early lessons, of the mentor who had shaped her skill and nurtured her love for the piano. She encouraged her students to feel the music, to connect emotionally with each piece, and to practice diligently without losing the joy of playing. Her approach was gentle, patient, and understanding, and her students thrived under her guidance. She felt a quiet pride as she watched them grow, knowing that her influence extended beyond performance, shaping the next generation of musicians in subtle but meaningful ways. Through her teaching and small performances, she began to build a reputation beyond the town. People from neighboring areas heard about her skill and sought her guidance, or invited her to perform. Yet, she continued to maintain her modest lifestyle, balancing her growing recognition with her desire for simplicity. She spent her mornings at the library, evenings teaching students, and late nights at her piano, exploring new compositions and refining her craft. Her life had expanded, but it remained grounded in the routines and values she had always cherished. The teachers who had first encouraged her to perform continued to admire her skill and dedication. They often sought her advice for other students, recognizing that her perspective was valuable and her judgment insightful. They spoke of her quietly, acknowledging the lessons she had inadvertently taught them, that talent is not always visible, that humility can coexist with brilliance, and that true mastery reveals itself in both private practice and public expression. Their respect for her grew daily, and she maintained a courteous, professional relationship with them, always focused on the music rather than the accolades. The woman also found herself reflecting on the impact of the recital, not just on her life, but on the lives of those who had witnessed her performance. People who had doubted the potential of ordinary individuals began to see differently. Students were inspired, teachers were humbled, and neighbors began to notice the quiet power of dedication and skill. Her performance had become more than a moment of personal triumph. It was a reminder to everyone that appearances can be deceiving, and that hidden potential exists in places we least expect. She realized that her decision to perform had created ripples far beyond what she could have imagined. In her private moments, She continued to explore music with passion and curiosity. She experimented with different styles and techniques, sometimes improvising, sometimes tackling challenging new pieces. The piano remained her sanctuary, the place where she could express herself fully, without expectation or judgment. Even as recognition grew, she never lost sight of this personal connection to the music, understanding that her true fulfillment came from the intimate relationship she had nurtured with each note, each chord, each phrase. Her family and close friends noticed the change as well. They saw her confidence grow, her presence more assured, yet she remained grounded and kind. She shared her experiences with them in quiet conversations, speaking of the joy of performing and teaching, but not seeking their praise or validation. They admired her humility and resilience, recognizing the balance she had achieved between personal satisfaction and public acknowledgement. She became an example of quiet strength, a person who could embrace opportunity without losing herself. As months passed, the woman began to explore opportunities to perform in larger venues. She approached each one with careful consideration, ensuring that her connection to the music remained central. Her performances were met with increasing admiration, and she began to develop a following of listeners who appreciated not only her technical mastery, but the emotion and authenticity she brought to each piece. Critics and audience members alike noted the rare quality of her playing, a combination of precision, artistry, and heartfelt expression that made each performance memorable. She accepted this recognition with grace, always returning to her piano afterward, alone, to continue the journey of self-expression that had always defined her. Her journey was not without challenges. Occasionally, the pressure of performing publicly, of meeting expectations, brought moments of doubt and anxiety. She had to remind herself of the joy that had always drawn her to the piano, the personal connection that sustained her through quiet years of practice. She learned to manage these moments, using them as opportunities to deepen her understanding of music and herself. She discovered that vulnerability, both in performance and in life, could be a source of strength, allowing her to connect more deeply with her audience and with her own emotions. Over time, she began to mentor more advanced students, guiding them through challenging compositions and helping them discover their own potential. She shared her philosophy that music is not just about technical skill, but about emotional expression, patience, and authenticity. Her students flourished under her guidance, inspired by her example and her quiet encouragement. She found fulfillment not only in performing, but in nurturing talent, helping others uncover their hidden abilities, and witnessing the transformative power of music. The woman's life had shifted in ways she could not have predicted. From a quiet, unremarkable existence, she had stepped into the light, revealing her extraordinary talent to a world that had never expected it. Yet, she remained grounded, balancing public recognition with personal fulfillment. She had learned that true mastery was not about applause or fame, but about dedication, love for the craft, and the courage to embrace one's abilities when the moment required it. The music had guided her, revealing her hidden depths and allowing her to share her gift with others. Years later, the recital became a story often told in the town, a moment when an ordinary-looking woman transformed the expectations of everyone present. Children who had attended were inspired to pursue music. Teachers remembered the lesson of humility and careful observation, and the audience spoke of the performance as unforgettable. The woman herself rarely spoke of it, content to let the memory exist as a quiet testament to the power of dedication, talent, and authenticity. She continued her life with the same calm grace she had always possessed, now enriched by experiences that had expanded her world while honoring the simplicity she cherished. In the end, the woman remained the same in outward appearance, quiet, modest, and unassuming. But inside, she carried the knowledge that she had faced her fears, revealed her hidden talents, and touched the lives of many through the music she loved. Her story became a quiet legend, a reminder that extraordinary abilities can exist in the most unexpected places, and that true mastery is not about recognition alone, but about the passion, discipline, and heart devoted to the craft. She continued to live her life with humility and grace, sharing her music when it mattered most, and finding joy in every note she played.